Hello and welcome to the Ghibli Rewatch series of the Overly Animated Podcast, where we will be going through every Studio Ghibli movie chronologically from the beginning. I'm Dylan Hysen, and today I'm joined by Michelle Anderer.
Hello.
And Alex Bonilla.
Hey.
Yes, welcome to the first entry in our Ghibli Rewatch podcast series. This will be a regular weekly series every Wednesday morning, going through every Studio Ghibli movie from the beginning. That is over 20 movies. This will be a few months we'll be doing these podcasts. If you're listening in the future, all the podcasts might be out already. But if you're listening along with us, regardless, I guess you can watch or rewatch all of the Studio Ghibli movies kind of as we go weekly. And kind of the impetus for this is that they are available streaming for the first time across the world. In the US specifically, we're going to time this with the release of the Studio Ghibli's movies being on HBO Max, a new streaming platform. That's on May 27th, and we are here a week before that with a first movie which is not technically part of the Ghibli catalog, and I don't believe is being treated as a Ghibli movie in any of these streaming catalogs, and that is the Castle of Cagliostro, which is Hayao Miyazaki's directorial debut. But before that, we're gonna I'm gonna introduce everything about this series, then we'll start getting into that movie.
Cagliostro specifically on Netflix right now.
Yes. As of our current present, Castle of Cagliostro is on Netflix in the United States. And more generally, all these Ghibli movies will be on Netflix internationally relative to where we are. So every country except for US, Japan, Canada will have the Ghibli movies on Netflix. The United States will have them on HBO Max. So if you've never seen Ghibli before, now is the perfect chance to watch each movie. You could do once a week, follow along with us on the podcast. I know some people like doing that with podcasts they listen to, or you can watch all of them and then as they come out, listen to these. And if you've seen them all, now's a great opportunity to rewatch. I know some of these I have not seen in a while. Some I've seen more recently. Just very excited to get into every Ghibli movie again. So yeah, join us every Wednesday morning. These podcasts will be coming out for a new Ghibli movie. So I'll be joined by, Michelle, Alex, a few other people. Some of us are Ghibli experts. Some of us more Ghibli newbies. We'll probably have some sort of mixture on for each movie. Maybe the co-host has seen it. Maybe they haven't. We'll enrich our Ghibli journey together with all of our perspectives on all these movies. Yes.
Our Ghibli journey?
That's
boy.
Alliteration, kind of.
Yeah, there you go. So come
totally planned.
Come rewatch all of them. Should that have been the name for the podcast? Ghibli Journey instead of Ghibli
let's do it
Rewatch?
Now. It's early. Let's switch.
I could change it.
Just edit it.
Okay, maybe we'll see. We'll see what you see in the feed, what the name is. So today, Cagliostro. Next week, Nausicaa, which also technically not Ghibli, but has been adopted by the Ghibli canon. And then going through all the Studio Ghibli movies. As our present is, there's 2 in production, which is exciting. And then, maybe at the end we can throw in any sort of Ghibli adjacent movies like Mary and the Witch's Flower. We'll see. And maybe some bonus ones at the end. But, we have a lot of Ghibli catalog to go through here, several months worth of podcasts. In terms of subbed or dubbed, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but I'm going to try to make this a sub judgment free zone, whichever you prefer to watch. Subbed or dub is fine. I've not mandated anyone watch any specific one. I would say for the most part, you'll find that we will probably watch them subbed and we'll discuss the subbed movies. But if you're watching them dubbed, personally, I think some Ghibli movies have some of the best movie dubs ever made. Some of them aren't as good, but that's also very valid. Last thing is I kind of want to present, I'll be leading us through this Ghibli catalog, and I feel like I am qualified to do so. I know there's a lot of, intense Ghibli fans out there, so I want to show that I know what I'm talking about. I'll ask, Michelle and Alex this when we start talking about the movie, kind of what their own Ghibli perspectives are. I first watched all the Ghibli movies kind of when I was a teenager and fell in love with them. I've seen all the Miyazaki ones multiple times, I think. Maybe not Ponyo or something. Well, so we'll see when we get to that one. But all of the other, some of the other ones. I mean, look, there's some I didn't love as much the first time. I'm interested to see how much, if I like them anymore the second time, or multiple times. But I've seen a lot of them multiple times. I've read a Miyazaki book, which I'm going to reference probably throughout this series, which is Miyazaki World by Susan Napier. I know there's a lot of great Miyazaki books as well. We'll reference other Miyazaki information. Last December, I made the pilgrimage to the Ghibli Museum in Japan, and it was amazing. And so maybe I'll talk about that, I guess, if probably for the Nausicaa podcast specifically, but can bring in some knowledge of that. So hopefully I'll be giving the perspective as a Ghibli expert here, and then we have varying degrees of Ghibli knowledge as well throughout our other people on this podcast. So I think that's basically everything. And we're going to be getting into, like I said, Castle of Cagliostro. I don't know what I feel like there might be a pronunciation difference between English and Japanese for this one. But this is a Lupin the Third movie. It is it's a weird one to start on, I would say, starting to get into the introduction for this movie, because you could argue, I think this is the most different Miyazaki directed film, like, out of all of them. Like, this stands out as maybe the most different of all of his movies, specifically because it's an entry in a series, in an anime series. It's a movie in the Lupin series. There's been Lupin television shows. I don't think any other Ghibli movie is an entry in an existing animated property. There's a lot that are adaptations of books. They're kind of loose adaptations, but this one, and like we said, this isn't even technically a Ghibli movie. This is Miyazaki gets assigned this as his first, is his directorial debut in 1979. A lot of these movies will be a long time ago. Miyazaki already, in his late 30s when he's directing this, he already has a lot of experience on a lot of early anime works in Japan, including an earlier Lupin the Third anime series earlier in the 70s with Takahata as well. And we'll be talking a lot about Takahata's movies. He worked with Miyazaki on Lupin, among other properties, in the 70s. And there's other kind of pre-Ghibli works we could have included in this. I think generally this is considered the place to start. Going through Ghibli is going through the works of Takahata and Miyazaki and a bunch of other amazing artists, but also, but specifically Miyazaki is going to be a lot of the focus when we talk about his films as what many consider to be the greatest anime director of all time. So I think starting with his first film makes a lot of sense here. And it's a fitting one to start with in some ways, even though it's very different, because I think there are a lot of Miyazaki common elements that we'll see throughout all of his movies, and we'll talk about that as well. So all that being said, as introduction to Cagliostro, Michelle, yes, we can start hearing from you. Like, first introduce everyone to your history with Ghibli movies. Like, how many have you seen? When did you watch them? Have you seen this movie before? When did you first see it? And then, like, generally, what do you think of this movie?
Oh boy. Okay. So I'd say, like, I'm a relatively moderate fan of Ghibli movies. I've seen about 85% of them at this point. All except for, like, I think Pompoko, My Neighbor the Yamadas, As the Wind Rises, and The Tale of Princess. That one.
That's a big one.
All but, like, 4. So, like, the latest ones, and the only reason I didn't see the other 2 was, like, I started watching the majority of Ghibli when I was in high school, and only the most popular ones were available to find illegally online during those times in my life. So it was really easy to find, like, Princess Mononoke and Nausicaa, and Kiki's Delivery Service. But, like, some of those, like, oh man, some of the, like, the way more, like, slice of life ones were super hard to track down for years and years. But they're all really amazing. I think the first one I ever watched was, like, the first anime I ever watched. I was, like, 8 years old, and it was when Spirited Away came out in theaters in the US. And I was not prepared for that at all. It totally went over my head in so many ways, but I still really liked it. Like, I liked the characters, even though I had no, like, frame of reference for anything that was happening. And And then I just fell in love with them in high school. And this one, honestly, I hadn't seen before. So me and Alex watched it like a couple weeks ago for the first time. And I was shocked I'd never picked it up sooner because it's such a fun movie. I was like a little curious. I haven't watched a lot of the Lupin the Third like film adaptations. I know there's several anime series over the years. There's like a new movie coming out. Like this character's been beloved and reincarnated in many forms for like several decades now. And I wasn't sure like how much of a James Bond character he was going to be. I was like trying to like hold my reservations if he was going to be like really like sleazy and gross, which apparently like he kind of is, just not when Miyazaki's directing him as a character. Because he was very just like sweet and charming and down to earth and just like an all around nice, fun, quirky person as a protagonist. And that was incredibly enjoyable. I almost wonder like, would this have been marketed in the US as like a children's movie? Because like part of me can really see that. It's that like there are stakes, I mean, and the people shooting guns at each other. But like honestly, like Castle in the Sky had all that, and they targeted that through Disney at children. So maybe this was considered a children's movie. I really liked it a lot. I thought it was beautiful. I was kind of, there are definitely a lot of Miyazaki things in this, just in terms of like his fascination with like machinery and cars and planes and just taking moments to have like a breath and enjoy the view. Like even in this movie, even in a Lupin movie, like you're like, oh wow, like look at this beautiful landscaping shot, or like, oh yeah, it's a pretty gazebo. Let's take some time in the plot to admire it, which are like all the lovely touches that kind of like make his style stand out. So I really enjoyed it. I would absolutely watch this movie again, like hands down. It was such a fun romp the whole time.
A fun romp. I like that as a review of
Put that on the DVD cover.
Yeah.
A fun romp, Michelle, 2020.
Yeah, Michelle, that's for the re-release. Yeah. Good points about it. We'll definitely be getting into the history of Lupin a little bit just to compare it to how Miyazaki's Lupin differs. I think that's a really interesting discussion point about this movie. But all that cool. Alex, same kind of questions. Your history with Ghibli, this movie, and what do you think of it?
Okay, so first, my history with Ghibli. As a relative latecomer to animation, I did not even know Miyazaki existed for pretty much my entire childhood. Not until like turning 18 and being more into the internet. It's like, oh, people talk about these old movies. It's like something that's like really cool animation. And so eventually you get around to watching the big movies that people talk about: Spirited Away, Mononoke, Whisper of the Heart. Usually I would take Fathom Events was a very big deal in me catching up to those movies. So like when they had screenings in the theater here in Philadelphia, me living independently, I was like, oh, okay, this is finally a reason for me to go like watch those movies on like a really big screen if they're as good as people say they are. And each time I went to a new movie, I'd be like, wow, is this the best movie I've ever watched? Wow, this is great. Like Nausicaa, especially, I remember having that kind of reaction. But I've only watched like the most well-known movies. A lot of the movies in between I have not watched, including Cagliostro, which, as Michelle mentioned, we watched together a couple weeks ago, and that was also the first time I'd seen it. Although, just briefly with Lupin the Third, I do remember that I feel like it was a year ago where there was a trailer for a CGI version of the movie, and I was really impressed.
Yes,
and I was really impressed by it. And at the same time, I had Verve, which has the Lupin the Third Miyazaki series on it. So I was like, oh, I'll like to look up some episodes, see what this is about. So I actually watched a couple of episodes of Lupin the Third a while ago,
like the original show.
Yeah, the original show, and including some of the Miyazaki directed episodes. So I went into Cagliostro knowing a little bit about Lupin. At least I wasn't lost with the characters. But I'll say, with this movie, I think it does a really, even if you didn't watch any Lupin the Third, it establishes the characters really really well. On you get who everybody is pretty quickly and their deal. It's So as with Miyazaki movies that I've watched so far, it's very colorful. It uses music in interesting ways. As Michelle mentioned, it feels very wholesome compared to what it could be. Well, we might talk about the series later, but just like in general, that series is a little bit more down to earth, gritty than what this movie is, which maybe is a testament to like how he handles his characters. And at the same time, it's also one that doesn't feel like it has a pointed message compared to other movies that I watch. It's kind of like focused on this story within this universe, but I enjoy that nonetheless. Like it keeps as adventurous as possible throughout, and the stakes stay high. I would say that there are some moments where it gets dramatic to a point where like I'm not sure children would really want to watch it. I mean, they could probably survive, but there are some moments that make elevate it to being a more serious film. But yeah, Cagliostro, I wouldn't. I'd say that it's very entertaining. It's not exactly on the top tier of movies that I've seen from Miyazaki, but still, like it's very rewatchable because of the fact that it's a fun story throughout, and all the main characters are likable. Even down to like the inspector character, who's more villainous in the series, but like here he's fun and he fits into the story pretty well. So all in all, this was a fun ride. I would second fun romp even.
Okay. Two romps so far.
2 votes for romps.
Okay. Yeah, I would not have thought of calling this a romp, but I think it fits. But that's cool, Alex. You've seen some Lupin, because this is the only Lupin thing I've ever seen. Like I'm familiar with the character, and I've read about it, and I'll reference some like outside materials and stuff, but definitely, like, this was my introduction to Lupin, still kind of the only Lupin thing I've consumed. Yeah, I first watched this when I was going through all the Ghibli movies, forever ago, and I really liked it at the time. Really liked it when I rewatched it just a few days ago. I think you could consider this to be like, I think your opinion, Alex, is basically what others would say. I don't think this would be in kind of the top tier, but if you want to consider this right outside of that, right there, I think that is very valid. This is a great movie. It's different. I think one of the first discussion points I got into, I didn't mention this beginning, but like I feel like it is a genre movie in how it's like, you're right, it doesn't have like a pointed Miyazaki type message. It's focused on being a member of kind of the action adventure spy type genre, even though Lupin's a thief, this is heavily based on James Bond, so kind of you get the spy vibes going on, I think. And that in itself, even though there's so many common elements from Miyazaki's later films, I think like it being this genre entry is very different. And honestly, this is just one of the best action adventure movies I've ever seen. Like Miyazaki just in first movie instantly just makes one of the best ones. Like
I know, right? It would be if he waited till he was in his late 30s so he could just nail it down completely on his first try.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, it would be cool if Miyazaki did another movie like in this vein specifically. I mean, maybe there's some Porco Rosso is a little similar-ish to that, but it's like he nailed it for already. So why go back? I feel this is it's already so good. So remembering some things Alex and Michelle were talking about, and I think Michelle was talking about the lack of availability of Ghibli films growing up. And that's why this is like the impetus for doing it such a big deal. I feel like that everyone can watch every Ghibli movie now. Like that's like literally. Most of these movies, half or more, you could only find like sketchy places online for a while.
Mm-hmm. Or like rent a DVD, but like where are you going to do that anymore?
Yeah, growing up there are a few that permeated kind of like probably throughout our childhoods. I think Spirited Away and Kiki's Delivery Service were two really big ones. Oh, for
sure.
Yeah, those are like genuinely big hits. Those are my first experiences actually probably watching those two movies specifically, like pretty young. I think Cagliostro is great. I don't think it's like one other Ghibli opinion to establish. I think that there are three Miyazaki directed movies, which I would say are the 3 best movies I've ever seen, the 3 best films, like in my opinion of all time, which I think is a crazy hot take. But
it's crazy hot take.
That like should establish the love I have for some of these movies. And Cagliostro isn't quite up there, but I think it is pretty incredible. And something that struck me on this viewing is just how gorgeous this movie is. Like, this is up there, I feel like, with some
really
of his...
pretty.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it feels wrong to be like, hey, this Miyazaki movie is very colorful, like, as if that's a special thing. But at the same time, like, you consider this is like his first directorial debut. So, directorial debut. So the fact that already that's established as like one of his signatures is in itself notable. And I think that with the whole setting of it being a medieval castle and all, there are many cases of that setting being portrayed as dark and moody and whatnot. But like there's still like a lot of moments that he infuses here, it being, you know, bright and fun to look at, you know.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be one of these like common Miyazaki elements that we see, which is it's very vague but gorgeous animation, specific scenery shots. Miyazaki movies are very prone to do the pillow shot, the just shot of the background, just showing off the animation, hold on it for a longer time than you would see for other movies. I think this movie definitely does that a few times. Maybe most notably when we see the titular castle for the first time. I think that's like a really incredible shot. We spend a lot of time surveying it with the characters. And then I feel like another really notable one is at the end when we see the Roman city that they unveil. We spend a lot of time looking at that. Yeah, I guess the other thing I didn't say is that we're going to be full spoilers for all these movies. So I'll remember to say that at the top next time. But
spoilers, there's a castle.
Yeah, there's a castle in this movie. And the castle itself is another common Miyazaki element. So there's a lot of castles. We'll see in 2 movies, we'll see a whole movie about a castle and stuff. So a lot of castles going on, and this is a really gorgeous castle. Maybe we'll start to rank all the Miyazaki castles as we go. Maybe that can be a thing. But no, I really think this is up there with some of his most gorgeous works. And, you know, I think we all kind of agreed this is like a really good entry as a genre movie. Does one of you said that it doesn't have, like, I think Alex, you said it doesn't have like this message. Do you think it loses something? Like a lot of Miyazaki movies, this movie isn't as heavy with the environmentalism, not as heavy maybe with feminist themes, you know, like it's more, I think, more focused on action and telling the story. Is that maybe a reason it's not as successful as some of his best?
Perhaps. I mean, I guess I had come to expect that kind of stuff from his movies. So the fact that this one doesn't really end up with anything specific, it just, I wouldn't say it detracts from the movie, because obviously you can have a movie just be like a really fun time without making you think about any heavy stuff in the outside world. And like, if we dig into it, we'll see there are like hints and pieces you can dig out of this already. So I'd say that if you're like ranking movies, then yes, it hurts its ranking in that it doesn't feel like it's doing anything transcendent. But at the same time, I don't think it takes away from it fulfilling its purpose, which is being an entertaining adventure movie.
Nice. Yeah. Michelle, what do you think of that? Do you think it loses anything from not having a more heavy messaging?
I mean, I think one thing to really consider here is every other Ghibli movie Miyazaki's gotten to direct has been his own movie, you know, like, well, okay, that's not true at all. I mean, but I think like
there's some that are loosely based on
things. Yeah, like Howl for sure not, Kiki for sure not. But I think as like a first-time director with such a beloved, like well-known established franchise as Lupin the Third, there's only so much you can do that won't, say, maybe like alienate the fan base. I feel like this movie is much more an example of like a Miyazaki twist on a beloved like staple IP character, you know, versus like a Miyazaki movie. Even though, like, I look at it and say, like, oh, yeah, like, I can feel him in this movie everywhere. I think it's a different thing trying to take on a whole, like, very well-established property for one movie and try to, like, reinvent the wheel. You know, there's a certain amount that he probably still had to adhere to in terms of, like, maybe character personalities or plot or just, like, the genre of an action-adventure spy kind of movie that weren't necessarily his like go-to thing, but more or less like he made it work in his own style and ways that made sense to him. And I feel like that's like what's kind of cool about it. The fact that like it is still like probably, I'm assuming, a recognizable movie in the regular Lupin the Third franchise. But even within that, it has like a very specific Miyazaki feel that the other movies don't, or that the show that the ones that weren't touched by Miyazaki don't have, you know? That, like Alex was saying, like maybe those are a lot more grittier. And, you know, this is like kind of fun and light, but that's like why it's so fun to watch it, because it's just really funny. It's like there's a lot of action and stakes, but it's also like very pleasant and enjoyable to watch. And you don't like worry too much anything really terrible is going to happen.
Yeah, and I think definitely Miyazaki's putting his own twist on a Lupin movie. I think you could go further than that, in that he's really making this character and this world his own with this movie. I think he makes some pretty big changes from the typical Lupin character, which he had worked on earlier. But I think he ages Lupin up and makes him kind of like this wistful looking back type of older thief here. Probably one of the biggest things he does is really take away this kind of womanizing aspect of Lupin to a large extent. We still see it in the movie. I think he has that brief exchange with the waitress at one point.
Yeah.
And then, you know, he clearly is enamored with Clarice to a certain extent, but he makes a clear decision to not go down that route, which I think is,
yes.
I feel like that's a very not Lupin move to do. It would be weird, considering I think a lot of us associate Miyazaki with female characters at the center of a lot of his movies and feminist themes. It's kind of weird that his first movie is this James Bond type character. But it's like, once you see what he does with the character, I think it's like, oh, that makes sense. Like that feels very Miyazaki. I want to read a quote from Miyazaki World by Susan Napier, because I thought this was when she said, an open letter Miyazaki published in the Lupin fan club newsletter made clear that his Lupin was going to be a very different character from the manga's flamboyant playboy hero. The fledgling director explained Lupin's actions are not really motivated by superficial things such as money, jewels, or women. In fact, Miyazaki suggested at the base of Lupin's soul swirls a rage towards the machinery of society that suffocates humanity, and he tries to bury the falseness of his heart through spurning himself to action. He is fighting to give his life meaning, and he is yearning for someone who can lead him to that fight. I feel like that's a good summary of Lupin, Miyazaki's own quote in the newsletter of his character in this movie. Napier talks a lot about kind of these yearning, wistful, ephemeral themes or tone that's going on throughout this movie. You know, Lupin feels like he's trying to, I don't know if he's trying to recapture something, but I feel like he always does come across a little bit wistful throughout the movie. And
I get there's like an underlying theme of him wanting to make up for his previous failure dealing with this castle. It's never a focus of it, but like that idea is always floating around, especially when we get to him being injured and him recounting his story. It like brings it back into the forefront, but it's always there in the movie.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like that kind of energy takes the place of maybe more of this aggressive male energy that might otherwise be there with this sort of character.
But he kind of hints at the fact that he was very much like that in his youth. Yeah. It's just that, like, if Miyazaki did age him up by like 10 or 20 years, he is like, you know, those were his childhood or like young adult days. But now he's looking for something different for mattering in his life, like a new kind of meaning, I guess.
Yeah, and that feels like such a good move to make with, if you want to not play into this sorts of this character, but still make it this character, you know, you make him older, and I think it fits within the character and still goes in the direction you want. And even if we're talking on this level with Lupin, I think his relationship with Clarice throughout the movie is probably the most interesting subject. One of the most striking moments at the end is when he kisses her on the forehead after she kind of goes in for a kiss, and then she like wants to go with him, and he says no. I think this is really striking, like especially for the time and the setting, like the context of this movie. But I feel like even now we're used to this character. This is still a convention in media in 2020 of you know, this character would get the girl even if she's younger. I mean, the movie doesn't make it super clear, but Clarice I think is 16 in this movie, so it's like, of course he should be doing this. But it still isn't. I feel like that's one of the most striking parts of the movie. It still feels like a big move, I think, on Lupin and the messaging of the movies. Like, I feel like that's a message in its own right. If this movie isn't full with clear messaging like Miyazaki's other movies. Michelle, what do you think of because I think you could argue this movie would be one of Miyazaki's less feminist movies just because of the subject matter, or is it because he subverts what it might be, does it make it more feminist?
The subversion definitely helps. I will say also, if this movie came out in 79, the landscape of how things were so much more insanely specifically gendered to an extreme between the 70s and the 90s even. Compared to now, it's night and day. Do you guys remember when princesses were everywhere? In the mid 80s, I know none of us were alive then. But,
so no, we don't remember.
That's when all the shows, all these it was a thing just to have the very to have someone rescue someone and to have that be very defined by your gender. I think aging Lupin up definitely helps with that. But I'll just say before I realized the twist with the ring, when he's in her chambers and he does the magic trick with her, I immediately was yo, this feels like something an uncle would do. This feels just a charming, older man, trying to do something nice for a young kid to help them relax kind of thing. There was nothing romantic about the magic trick section at all. So at the end, when he smooches her on the forehead and she's expecting him to kiss her on the mouth and he doesn't, I clapped and cheered, but also it made total sense by then because she is a kid to him. He remembers her being a baby child when he was a young adult. So I think it makes sense that there's no way he would go for that, even though he's a guy and I guess he could and no one would judge him, even though he's a lot older. I mean, I feel there are a few Miyazaki movies where maybe women aren't as prominent, but I will say for the time period, Clarice does what she can. She's a noble woman who's not used to roughing it, but when Lupin saves her off the cliff, she she takes off her glove and she wipes his face to try to wake him up. And then when they're on the rooftop and the Count's shooting at him and she thinks he's gonna die, she goes over to make a deal with the Count to spare his life. Miyazaki always does a good job of giving women characters reasons to help and be useful, actual people, even if the amount of them doing action is significantly less than the male real true main character. They're never just there. They're always trying to help where it makes sense. And I really appreciate that because that does seem going the extra mile, especially for something that was, being made in the 70s, where you really no one was going to bat an eye if you didn't have all that in there. The fact that he did have it in there, I think says a lot. So I like it. I love Clarice. I think she's great. She's doing her best to help out.
She's definitely doing her best. Yeah, I think you will find that basically every other Miyazaki movie has more screen time for female characters, more agency for female characters, but none of them are working with the constraints that he has with this property, So I think given what Lupin is, I think he's making Clarice pretty prominent, and she does have a lot of scenes of helping out in the way she can.
Plus, Fujiko's there to be the counter to Clarice. Clarice is helping out in very specific ways that make sense for kind of her character, but Fujiko's just an amazing spy in her own right and just so good at what she's doing, and she always seems to get away, and she's kind of ahead of Lupin in that department a lot of times, which is amazing too. So I feel the fact that Clarice is also not the only female character in this movie helps a lot for that, to balance it out.
And I want to say, I believe that Fujiko is the more impressive of the two characters in terms of what Miyazaki does with them, because Clarice, as far as I know, is an original character for this story, whereas Fujiko was an existing character in the series. She was often more drawn, more sexualized than she is in this movie. She's used as either a love interest to impulse Lupin to fight a villain, or a villain is made more menacing because they're threatening Fujiko. You know, like classic lady in distress stuff. That's kind of what Fujiko was there for. She still had the spy stuff, but they needed to use her for the tropes. Whereas here, they carry over the spy stuff. She's doing that, but she's not. But at the same time, like they leave behind the cliches of her needing to be the sexy one in the movie. Like she's just the part of the movie where she's in the camouflage suit is amazing because like it's fun, it's functional, and at the same time, like she still looks good in it no matter what, and she's still she ends up being a useful character throughout the entire movie. And you have at the end where like Fujiko leaves with the plates, and like that's classic Fujiko compared with the show. Like that's something that character would do. But the interesting part is that you change an existing character that's been treated like any other female character would be in that time, and you make her into someone who's more important to the story, treated with more respect than she was in the series. And so I particularly enjoyed that part because Fujiko is pretty great in this movie.
Yeah, I think that's another great point. Is that's the other element. Fujiko not romantically involved with Lupin in this movie. Not
yeah, like they like
she's like a rival in the most like playful, fun, encouraging sense of the word. Like she's a fellow spy, like doing her best to also get like money and have a good time.
I think they make reference to it once, like when they first meet, like long time no see. But again, like that's speaking to the fact that we're kind of pushing this in a future of this universe where it's been a while since all the stuff happened, and you know that helps matters. It helps us to move on and like consider these characters in their own universe of this movie.
Yeah. I think that's great presentation of those two characters. So I think that's a big like element of like Miyazaki's treatment of female characters that we see in this movie. We'll see throughout his movies. We've talked about castles, talked about I mean, I guess let's bring in planes. There's a prominent plane in here.
Oh my god.
That's probably the most memed or iconic, whatever your perspective is, Miyazaki elements. There's always going to see planes in his movies. We get one here. I think that. So environmentalism, the other really prominent one, I do think there's a large thread of that in the ending of this movie. And I think it's a little not as in your face as some of his other movies, but I think the discovery of the Roman city is right in line with his environmentalist themes. Maybe his preservation themes that kind of goes along with that. This notion of discovering the city, giving it to the world, it very like the world, it belongs to the world. Like I feel like that's a big component of the environmentalism, and just the notion of this being the past. Miyazaki has kind of preserved the past centric approach on environmentalism that I think to a large extent. So I think like we unearthed the city and we'll keep it there like this. That like I think goes in line with kind of like don't make the forest into the toxic forest or whatever, and like like this. I think it feels a lot like that, even if it's interestingly more of a man-made thing than innate nature thing going on. I do think there's a large element of history to his movies, and he has a large deference, I feel like, to old-fashionedness, not in a problematic way, but in like preserving things of the past and cultural of the past. And I think similarly his maybe like being respectful towards women. I think a lot of his feminist perspective maybe comes a little bit out of that, as much as his protect the environment, because it's like preserve like the way things used to be comes out of that. So all that I feel like is thematically related, and like I see how he arrives at what happens at the end of this movie, similarly to how he'll arrive at like strikingly going right to Nausicaa, which is kind of the extreme of his
all about.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess that and Mononoke.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of stuff. So I do think this definitely feels like a Miyazaki movie, but it also feels just like a fun action adventure movie. And I think another another element of that genre movie is like the action sequences are pretty revered in this movie.
They're so fun. They're mesmerizing to watch. Like the car physics on the roadside drive is just like it's like funny, but it's like so great to be like, how is this car gonna do it? Oh, okay, what's gonna happen now?
Yeah, it does kind of throw you for a swerve. Like you're about to get this like real serious mystery movie, but in like the first 5 minutes, there's a car going up on the wall as if this is Looney Tunes. But like that's the power of animation, that you can do both in the same movie and it fits. You can make it fit.
Yeah, I'm gonna look out for that on future. I don't remember much of him having cartoony physics, because there's also the scene of him jumping through the castle towers.
Oh, I love that sequence.
That's a really
when he's
good
like,
sequence.
oh yeah, I'll totally make this jump. It's like no actual person could make it, but maybe you could, Lupin. Maybe.
Yeah, like and the beginning of that, as we mentioned, the chase in the beginning, it's potentially the most historically notable part of the movie, even if it's like the one I would least to go to talking about, because I just love everything else after it too. But like that scene was like showed at Disney in like the 80s or 90s and had like a huge influence on Disney animators. We need to mention the Steven Spielberg rumors with this movie, because I'd always heard that Spielberg called this the greatest adventure movie of all time. I'd heard that. Now, turns out I don't know if that's sourced. Like I have not found a source for this. It used to be on Wikipedia. It's been removed for Wikipedia.
Oh no!
Dig up the edit history.
Yeah, and then but I found this in the one of the Ghibli wikias, and then he another potential quote is he called the car chase one of the greatest chase sequences ever filmed. Regardless of whether he exactly said these things, he definitely seems to have seen and liked this movie. I think you can find it playing in the background of one of his movies at some point. So there's some proof that he's seen this movie and stuff. But yeah, for this being like a non-Ghibli movie, Miyazaki's, somehow this is like permeated to a certain extent throughout, I guess Hollywood, even potentially live action people, but certainly has made an impact on the animation industry. Maybe as much as we'll definitely talk about how much Nausicaa and similar iconic Miyazaki movies have permeated throughout modern animated works. This movie, I think, has a legacy of, at the very least, its action sequences have been a big influence on animation.
While we're on the topic of action sequences, also there's the climax scene when they're fighting in the clock tower, and they're like going from gears to gears, and like everything's moving in the background while they're sword fighting and all, and like that's really impressive. And also I think it sets up Miyazaki's thing with technology in later movies as well. Like he loves seeing those gears move and things.
Yeah, clocks and gears.
Machines. I mean, if we're talking about Disney being influenced, The Great Mouse Detective apparently came out in 1986, so that's plenty of time for them to have taken influence from those gears for their movie.
I think so. Here's something that I've read. I was reading the Miyazaki book, and supposedly this movie was made in 4 months.
What?
I don't really know how that works, but
why do they only have 4 months?
If you look at Miyazaki's filmography, it's like he did something in 78 and then this movie came out in 79, so it kind of lines up. But they apparently just constantly worked on this movie for 4 months. And Miyazaki is, if we're talking about him as a person, is known for just being a complete workaholic, to the point of him like adversely influencing his health, or him being very scared of that and retiring several times to try to not have that happen. But I think it starts here with how is this movie made in 4 months? This is one of the most gorgeous movies ever made. What?
Maybe he just did everything. Maybe that's what that means. He's like, oh, you're not animating fast enough. I'll animate this section.
I think him and the team, but yeah, he does. He works on like every aspect. Oh yeah, he dominated production, taking over art, layout, animation, and characters. Yeah, so it feels very Miyazaki. He had a co-writer, but I saw it characterized as him largely being the one to influence the story. Of course, there's also like always key animators and stuff working along with him, but all of them doing this in 4 months is completely crazy. Well, I think we'll probably see this explored maybe throughout some movies if how much Miyazaki was working on everything. And now that's why the current movie, he's very old and working at a much slower pace, and so it won't come out for like 4 more years.
I feel like Miyazaki's been saying every movie is his last movie, at least starting with Princess Mononoke, and he's promised that to people every year, and then it just kept not being true. And I just, oh man, I get that he just like he gets riled up and he wants to he wants to show the world what he's thinking in his brain. But if this is his approach, yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff can kill you if you're not careful. And he is older, so you can't push yourself like that forever.
We'll talk about that with some future Ghibli movies, unfortunately.
Oh boy.
Yeah. The other aspects of Cagliostro. I mean, just the plot of the movie with the counterfeiting, the wedding, the clock towers. I love the assassins in this movie. The ninja assassins.
Terrifying. They make no sense, but like that's fine. They're still scary.
They got some intense armor going on.
At some point, I was thinking, are they frog people? Like,
yeah. Armor. It was hard to tell for most of the movie.
They're ninja human assassins. Yeah. Alex, what do you think of the counterfeiting? Just the plot. Are you engaged by the plot of the movie?
I had fun with it. I think it satisfyingly keeps the movie focused. I'm not sure if this is a theme of Miyazaki, but there's that scene in the middle where the inspector goes back to the United Nations and they can't agree on anything because everyone is doing bad things, and so we're kind of left with government is useless. You got to fix this stuff yourself. I feel like that's a thing, Miyazaki.
You're right. That's a notable scene. I don't know if he's as pointedly political, like in that regard, like
right.
He just doesn't feature political characters, but
like just the point of using like real countries is something, right? Like there's a Japanese representative, Soviets, United States, and this is the middle of the Cold War, right? So that was so I think that's where the counterfeiting is at its best, when like they bring in its effect on the world. Related, it gives the inspector something to do. I think the inspector is real fun in this movie, and
I love him. He's the Javert of this movie. That's all I could think watching it. His obsession with Lupin is so fun, but I have to say, Lupin's partner, Jigen, like they're so gay for each other. It's like they've been married for 50 years already. Like they're so comfortable, and it's amazing. And I have to imagine, if this show is so prolific that there has to be one of the main ships, right? It's those two together. Then maybe also Fujiko, but Lupin and Jigen for sure. Like they're perfect for each other. They're so on each other's wavelengths.
Yeah, we'll see how many fics there are on Archive of Our Own.
There's gotta be a lot.
I think that Lupin and Goemon might have more fics than Jigen, but Goemon is not really a character in this movie, which is kind of a problem.
He was just there. He barely did anything. They were like waiting outside the castle.
He's just being a samurai.
Being a samurai in his outfit.
Yeah, in the show he's really cool, and Lupin like fawns over him all the time, like, "Oh man, he's so cool."
Really?
But like in this movie, he doesn't do anything. So.
I feel like the inspector and Lupin, there's a lot of
chemistry
in this
movie.
That's
the thing. Like, you can ship Lupin with like anyone, and it makes sense, which is amazing.
But not Clarice, because the movie says
not
no,
Clarice.
So don't do
she's
that.
16.
The movie says don't do that. The Count. I feel like the Count is a very Miyazakian type villain.
Oh yeah. I
think he's very imposing and charismatic to a certain extent, but yeah, and his fight in the clock tower, I think, is really good. I think that's Jodot's the leader of the assassins. Interesting character, I guess.
He's got like green hair, right? Like that's a choice.
Yeah,
he looks like a gremlin. I love it.
Yeah.
Like a clown or a gremlin or both. It's good.
I will say the thing I remembered like most visually, like after watching this as a teenager, was like the ninja assassins. I feel like that's just like such a striking visual. Like that's like what stuck in my head about this movie. I think we've covered most of the plot and characters and stuff. I mean, there's a ton in here. Everything with the opening scene as well.
Well, another scene that's pretty good is the church scene when Lupin and his gang comes up to break up the wedding. You got that fake Lupin getting stabbed all over.
That was like, legit.
Yeah,
I was worried.
that's the scene I was thinking of when you said this could be marketed as a kids movie. Like you could, but you'd also have to put kids.
Oh yeah, I was going to comment that.
which-
I think Lupin's intended for like teenage boys or young adult boys and stuff. So I don't think it's like as traditionally as a kids property.
Yeah, but
this movie.
I see the point that like for the most part this is a pretty wholesome movie. But then there's like brief moments like I was like, whoa.
It wasn't real, so maybe they could get away with it. Because like,
Right.
not a real person didn't get stabbed. It was a dummy.
Yeah, you could do that too.
Maybe PG rating would be fine. 10-year-olds, you're good to go.
Okay, Michelle says.
Also, in that scene, Fujiko with the camera woman plot and the inspector hamming it up in front of the camera is like, oh, what did I find? Like that whole aside in the middle of the fight scene is also like pretty good. They do a good job like that. Like it's not. The fight scenes never last for too long, or they interject it with something else going on. Like you never get bored with the action scenes, which is a really good thing for this kind of movie.
Yeah, I think they're all really good, and the movie's paced really well. Yeah, I don't know. And Michelle, anything else that's standing out from you from stuff that happens in the movie?
This was like one of the recent action movies I can think of where like the action actually was very engaging all the time. Because I feel like sometimes with like genre action films, you can get in this route where it's like, all right, let's like try this explosion. Let's try this car crash. Let's try this like gun shooting sequence. And it's just like, it feels like they're just doing it for the sake of doing it because that's what you're supposed to do in that kind of genre. But this felt very purposeful. Like there are a lot of action sequences in a lot of different locations, but they're all very distinctive and they help progress the plot along, even if it is working within the constraints of like a very specific genre film. It's like very enjoyable the whole time. Like when they go underwater to like the dungeon and they like need to find a way out. It's just like, all that stuff is just so good to watch, and it's fun because like they made the characters fun. So watching the characters do all this stuff is like way more enjoyable because like they make it an enjoyable experience. So I really like it for that. Like when I said it was like easy watching, it's like that's part of it. Like it doesn't feel like a slog getting through this. Like we've seen it 100 times. Like it still feels fresh, even though like this isn't super unique, but it's like fun. Like that's what makes it unique. Like how fun and just chill it is.
Yeah, I love the scene in the dungeons.
It's so good.
About that. That's another part that really sticks in my head. I think in terms of quick and easy to watch, I think this is probably half an hour shorter than most Miyazaki movies. That's really a key component.
Well, if you only got 4 weeks, I mean, I guess you gotta be a little shorter.
Yeah, I mean, hour 40, that makes sense for this type of movie. But some of his movies get up there, I feel like, in runtime.
Oh, yeah.
That may also help to the idea of it feeling very focused on the story, never really having a tangent time.
Yeah.
I mean, but compare this to like Nausicaa next week. There's a lot less going on here in terms
Nausicaa
of
has a lot of parts that could have been trimmed, but they did not.
We'll explore this. Okay.
One could argue.
Alex, other parts of Cagliostro?
I mentioned the music at top. Like it's not there's nothing like iconic compared to other movies that I've watched. But, like there are pieces that are still pretty good, like the organ music during the church scene is very like it amps up the tension there. When he's telling his story about meeting Clarice, I have a note here that says there's a flute part in this that kind of sounds like the theme for Shrek and Fiona. So I can't trying to remember. Da-da-da, da-da-da-da.
Okay, Shrek influenced by this movie.
I don't know. But yeah, I think I've covered all the stuff that I wanted to cover from this movie. It's a really fun time. I agree with. I think Michelle mentioned this. Like it feels very rewatchable in a way that certain movies like certain movies feel like a lot more investment in terms of your brain capacity as well as like just time overall. This feels like a movie where like you can just like sit back, you don't really need to think too hard, you're just having fun watching the story develop, but you don't have to think too hard about like what's coming next, So like in that sense, I think that this movie triumphs of just being easier to engage with than maybe some of his more thoughtful works.
Yeah, I think easy to engage with, just very fun. Very, very much a romp. Yeah, as covered. But it was a fun one to revisit, I think, for me, Cagliostro, and definitely one I'll be watching again. And yeah, I think we had some good discussion about it. I think maybe some of his other movies will lend to even further, deeper discussion. So this can kind of be seen as an introduction to what we'll be covering in this podcast series. So hope you guys enjoyed everything we talked about. You can always let us know what you thought about everything. We podcast generally about animation at the Overly Animated Podcast. The website for that is overlyanimated.com. And you can see all the methods of contacting us there. And I want to thank the Overly Animated patrons at patreon.com/overlyanimated. Thanks to all our current patrons, especially our patron of the podcast, Bronwyn, and our thanks as always to our patron executive producers, Ryan, Steve, Alex, Beatrice, Hugh, Michael, Needle, and Phonician. So yes, next Wednesday we'll be talking Nausicaa with the official release on HBO Max. Very excited to get into one of my favorite movies ever, one of everyone's favorite movies to a certain extent. Love Nausicaa. So much to get into. I will say I've put off talking about a lot of Miyazaki movies for a long time on Overly Animated. I'm pretty intimidated to talk about some of the greats, I'll say. We did do a Nausicaa podcast in the past, but that would be probably the reason we're only doing this in such a structured, coordinated way. I think it's I revere these so much, so hopefully I can do justice at all with discussions of them. So will be fun to make this journey, and thanks for checking out the first part of this. We'll see you for Nausicaa. Thanks for listening, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.